Okay, good morning, everybody. I think we've got everyone in assembling. So I see a few are still coming in. Welcome. For those who don't know me, I'm Kelly Northwood, the Chief Executive Officer of Visual Media Association, the peak industry body representing paper, print, packaging, mail, publishing and distribution. Nice big sector of all that we do. Across our $18.9 billion industry, employing 229,194 Australians. Some nice stats of which we can continue to be proud of. But what's also important about employing just under 230,000 Australians is making sure that we're always well briefed and we're across important discussions like we're about to embrace today across leadership diversity, and empowering our teams. Whether we're small businesses or large, and over 92% of our members and industry are small businesses, having the opportunity to understand some of the how-tos in today's session and discussion will be very powerful. Our speaker and I have already spoken about this in preparation for today's session. Being a small business is no excuse for ignoring some of these amazing opportunities to strengthen your business. Before we do introduce our speaker, I do want to shout out to our two lead sponsor partners, Ricoh and Media Super. I say it every week and I say it unashamedly. Without the sponsorship and financial but also resource support of both Ricoh and Media Super, not just this year but the previous 3 years in Ricoh's example, and well over a decade, I think we're getting close to 2 decades in fact, with Media Super's support, is very much appreciated, and something that a lot of the programs that we bring to our members and industry simply couldn't be achieved. So a shout out to both of those organisations. Ricoh is a supplier to our industry, but a true industry partner of the Visual Media Association, wanting to support programs that enhance and provide stability and strength to our industry, and Media Super are our endorsed industry super fund. Now, today's discussion is going to include a really nice Q&A at the end, and I've committed to being incredibly vulnerable to even my own experiences across a male-dominated industry as a female. But diversity is not just gender, and I think it's really important that we put that up front, that diversity is across all diversity across our industries and across our employees, and the richness that provides for our industry. I'm introducing Christina Bruce, who is the Director of Sellabilities. No stranger to Power of Print. Christina was a very powerful keynote speaker at the P.o.P Summit last year, sharing with us some very unique insights into how we as print industry salespeople are approaching sales more focused on specifications and getting that job wrong, as opposed to actually providing a solution for customers. She gave a good example of that, and I'm still being quoted that example by those who attended, which talks to Christina's resonance with the industry. She has over 25 years experience with sales and marketing, working across teams in leadership and training in her corporate career in Australia and Asia Pacific. Enthusiastic professional development is her passion. She's actually an enthusiastic person. She and I have had a great opportunity to have coffees and share ideas. You're about to hear from someone who's intelligent, passionate about change, passionate about communication, and passionate about perfecting and improving. What better a person to talk with us about her experiences across leadership and how we can really champion as individuals, as small businesses, as even larger businesses, diverse leadership. I'll hand over to Christina, and I look forward to hearing this discussion and also having a really robust Q&A at the end, because I think some of these discussions require vulnerability and open discussion, which I think we can all benefit from. Welcome, Christina.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Kelly. What a lovely introduction that you always provide. So it's nice to join you all this morning. Thanks for tuning in either live or when you hopefully listen to the recording back at a later date. So yes, I am the owner and director of a company called Sellabilities, and we do have the privilege every week of joining leaders and teams in a variety of different organizations. And so we kind of get to experience this leadership and diverse teams firsthand all the time. So it was really nice to be invited to kind of share some thoughts on what we see in this space. And so some of the content I'm going to take you through today actually comes from one of the leadership programs we first ran with a team back in COVID, when we first noticed our working environment change. And so a couple of slides of content today comes from one of our programs, and it's thought-provoking. It's designed to get you to sit as an individual, whether you're a member of a team or whether you are already a leader, and get you to just kind of sit and think about the role that you play in creating the team that you work within, or the team that you lead, or perhaps the business that you lead and manage, and your lens and sphere of influence. And of course, we are sales training specialists, and as a part of that, we're constantly having to sell and influence internally as well as externally. And perhaps there's some changes we can make to ourselves and to our teams in terms of how we do that, and how diversity can play a role in helping us do that. So the first thing I thought I would do is ask you a self-reflection question, because I know when I was first promoted into a leadership role, it was because I was actually the top performer at the time, not necessarily because I was going to make the best leader. And this is actually something that we still see quite a bit when we work with organizations, is that often we see managers or leaders that got into that position because they were technically the strongest, or they were the best performer, not because they had the best leadership qualities, or because they had a really clear intention or even vision for the sort of team or organization that they wanted to build and lead. And for many leaders, being a leader is unconscious. You know, we may have some great skills, yet we lead without clearly defined leadership purpose and a vision for the impact that we want to make as a leader, which of course includes our approach to diversity and building diverse teams and organizations. So the question here is, are you a leader by design or by default? Do you have what we would call a conscious relationship with your identity as a leader? And of course, today's topic is about diversity, and therefore your ability and your desire as a leader to create diverse teams. And so when we talk about leadership and championing diverse teams, you are of course having to lead yourself and lead others. And there are typically three core elements to leadership. There's achieving through task on the left-hand side of our kind of seesaw. On the right-hand side, there's of course leading and achieving through people, and that's that human connection and relationships. And of course, all of this is sitting on the fulcrum of leading self, and that's about self-awareness and self-insight and the emotional intelligence that you have as a leader. Now, just really quickly, and this might seem obvious, but you know, achieving through task is where you're able to align your team or your business around a strategic vision. You of course set some goals. You probably, you know, put some planning and processes in place so that the team can deliver and execute on those goals. You might have short or current problems that the team are focused on solving, and you know, you're responsible for making sure that there are the systems and structures in place so the team can kind of do what they need to do. So you're leading through task. On the other side, of course, is leading through people. And this is really at the heart of leadership, because leadership is about people and it's about relationships. And if we don't have people, we don't have anything to lead. So it really starts with human connection and having effective communication skills. That's all about discovering, uncovering, harnessing the potential and talent within people, which of course involves, you know, giving feedback and coaching and having courageous conversations, how you maintain and build relationships, and really just having that genuine concern and making sure the people within your team and your organization feel part of the team and part of the organization. And you've kind of got that inclusive culture. But of course, all of this is finely balanced on the fulcrum in the middle here, which is all about leading self. And without a solid base, without you having a really clear vision of the sort of leader that you want to be, it's impossible to kind of achieve things either effectively and of course consistently over time. And self-awareness has been cited as one of the most important capabilities for leaders to develop. And we hear that time and time again. And so that's kind of where I want to put a little bit of focus this morning, of course, around this topic of how, as a leader, do we make sure that we've got diversity in our teams and in our organizations, and how we lead that diversity. And this kind of got me thinking is, what is diversity? I mean, it is such a word that we hear all the time now. We know that there's a lot of research and focus going into diversity and making sure we've got diversity and that we're recruiting and training diverse teams. But what does it encapsulate? And to be honest, I was a little surprised when I went searching for a definition, because diversity, according to Mercer and their research that they do, which is called When Women Thrive. It's a survey that they first started back in 2014. They repeated in 2016, and they did it again in 2020. They've got this wonderful definition of diversity as being defined as a variation in backgrounds, attitudes, values, beliefs, experiences, behaviours, and lifestyle preferences with respect to gender, race, ethnicity, nationality, language, age, cognitive and physical abilities and characteristics, sexual orientation, education, religion, socioeconomic situation, marital status, social role, personality traits, and ways of thinking. Now, I think you would agree with me that that is a very vast, broad, big definition of diversity. But to be honest, when I first read this and I reflected on this, what I actually took from this is diversity actually means inclusion. It means a workplace where we proactively include people. And so for me, diversity is really the outcome of inclusion and belonging. So when we have a workplace or we have a team that is inclusive and people feel like they belong, then we are creating a diverse workforce. Diversity is really the data that we capture. It's the data that tells us whether we have a diverse workforce or we don't. And it helps us understand where the dial might need to shift or change so that we can see an improvement. So it's important for, of course, if you're listening today and you're responsible for building a business or building a team, you're probably capturing some of this data already that would give you some insights into how your team or your business is performing in regards to diversity. But really, at the heart of diversity, what diversity is a workplace that is inclusive and people feel like they belong. And what we know from the research, and I'm sure you've seen it, is that diversity, if you have a diverse workplace, it's absolutely good for everyone. So the Diversity Council of Australia published some research last year that, of course, feels intuitively right. And essentially what their research shows is that when we have an inclusive workplace, because you can see that this is inclusion at work, it's more than just making people feel good. It actually creates a much better work environment that boosts our employees and our team members' well-being. It fuels their performance and, of course, minimises risk. And there are all these benefits that come from employees that feel like they work in an inclusive workplace versus those that feel that they don't. And of course, you can see it here in the slide. We've got things like job satisfaction going up. So workers in inclusive teams are feeling 10 times more likely to be very satisfied than workers in non-inclusive teams. Mental health improves. So workers in inclusive teams are 4 times more likely to feel that work has a positive impact on their mental health. Turnover, this is a big one for me because this is one of the things I see organisations struggle with all the time, but workers in inclusive teams are 3 times less likely to leave their organisation. Now, the reason I kind of shine the spotlight on this one momentarily is that turnover just has this huge cost impact, not just in terms of what it costs us to recruit a new team member in terms of advertising and paying for the recruitment process, but the stress that it puts on other team members to pick up the load when we're short on resources, then the time, energy and resources it takes to advertise, recruit, onboard and induct, that happens over months, not weeks, typically in most organisations. So the impact to an organisation that can reduce turnover is significant. So it's not surprising that we see that individuals are 3 times less likely to leave an organisation when they feel like they are working as part of an inclusive team. And of course, feedback. Again, we run training sessions all the time on how to give feedback effectively and how to coach individuals. And so I really love this data point as well, is that workers in inclusive teams are 2.5 times more likely to have been given feedback that they found useful. And what we see when we work within inclusive teams is that feedback is a two-way process. We have leaders and team members voluntarily asking for feedback, and then on the flip side, being really receptive when feedback comes their way that is constructive and timely. So of course, you see that improve when you have an inclusive workplace. So that's, you know, all the good news at an individual level, but of course, having an inclusive workplace is also really great for business. And this, of course, again, makes sense that there's a really strong link between inclusion at work and team performance. And of course, innovation, inclusive teams are 9.5 times more likely to be innovative than non-inclusive teams. Inclusive teams are 8.5 times more likely to work together effectively. So we see that collaboration and cohesion go up, and that's often because individuals and teams are having a good time. So through another process that we use called Squatify, we actually see happy at work scores go up. We see personal connection scores go up. We see the team much just enjoying being together, and of course that fosters lots of other health and well-being things. So you can start to see how these metrics that we're showing here are intricately connected. Customer service, so inclusive teams are 4 times more likely to provide excellent customer service. And motivation, again, I find this one really interesting because motivation, as you all would know, fluctuates. It'd be great to wake up every day and feel really motivated to go to work and do a good job, but we can't actually rely on motivation to be constant. It is something that goes up and down. So it is also, it's really nice and reassuring for me to see here that inclusive teams are 2.5 times more likely to have members willing to work extra hard, you know, go the extra mile, do that extra thing because they want to, not because they feel like they have to help their teams succeed. So we know that diversity is good for everyone, and diversity comes from having inclusion and belonging in the workplace. So what I thought would be interesting for us to have a look at now is what impacts diversity. What's getting in the way of us creating a diverse workplace, and what's getting in the way of us building inclusive teams and inclusive organizations. And so I thought it would be useful now to share a nice little video that comes from Franklin Covey. Many of you would know that he is world famous for his 7 habits of highly effective people, but he's got a lovely little video that I'm going to share with you now around mindset and paradigms that you might find interesting.
As you can see, our food is doing fantastic. We should have that all wrapped up by now. Okay, appreciate that.
So much of what we do in our personal lives and at the office is the result of the paradigms we hold. And what we do, in turn, affects the results we get.
Thanks for coming to the meeting today, everyone.
The word paradigm comes from the Greek root paradigma, meaning pattern, the pattern we expect to see, or the mental image of the way things are. We see everything through the perspective of our own paradigm. If you see your industry as one where growth is impossible, how does that affect what you do every day? And what results do you think you'll get from your actions? On the other hand, suppose you saw unlimited prospects for growth in your industry. How would that change your actions? What we see, our paradigms, determine what we do, which in turn determines what we get. And unless we consciously stand apart from and examine our paradigms, we might never see that perhaps many of them are distorted short-sighted, or just flat out wrong.
絶対うまくいきます。お願いします。
I remember a mini paradigm shift I experienced one Sunday morning on a subway in New York City. People were sitting very quietly, some reading, some resting with their eyes closed. Suddenly, a man and his children entered the subway car. The children ran yelling to the car, throwing things, grabbing people's newspapers. Their father sat down near me and closed his eyes and did nothing. I felt irritated. I could not believe he would let his children run wild like that. After a few minutes of patience and restraint, I turned to him and said, "Sir, your children are really disturbing a lot of people. I wonder if you could control them just a little more."
Yeah, you're right. I should do something. But we just came from the hospital where their mother died about an hour ago, and I guess they don't know how to handle it. Guess I don't know how to handle it.
Can you imagine how I felt at that moment? My paradigm shifted. Suddenly, I saw things differently. And because I saw differently, I thought differently. I felt differently. I acted differently. My irritation vanished. Compassion flowed freely. I wanted to help instead of criticizing and complaining. Once you see things as they really are, you'll think, feel, and act differently. And you'll do it automatically, spontaneously. Can you see why paradigms are deeper than attitudes and behavior? If you want to make minor changes in your life, work on your behavior. But if you want to make significant quantum breakthroughs, work on your paradigms.
I don't know about you, but whenever I watch that video, I get a little bit emotional. It kind of, when you see it for the first time, it kind of stops you in your tracks, I think. And it always brings a little bit of a tear to my eye, to be honest, because I find it really powerful to make you just stop and think, well, what are my paradigms? What is my mindset? And of course, today we're talking about this lens of diversity and diversity in teams and diversity in leadership, and what paradigms or mindset might I be bringing into the workplace, or are you bringing into the workplace, that might be influencing the sort of teams or the organization that you are building? Paradigms are the thoughts, attitudes, and beliefs that are shaping our behavior as individuals and the way we show up in the workplace, but also as leaders and the people that we have around us. And they have this huge impact on how effective we are as leaders, and of course, ultimately the teams that we build and foster, and how inclusive our workplaces are. And at the start of the session, I asked you to reflect on, are you a leader by design or by default? Because if by chance you are a leader by default and you haven't done the work to really think about what sort of leader do you want to be and what sort of team do you want to create, then possibly your paradigms and your mindset are really influencing what you have today in the workplace, which might be wonderful and nothing needs to change. But if by chance it's not, and things aren't the way ideally you might like them to be, or your teams would like them to be, then perhaps there's a paradigm shift. And the thing about paradigms is that they can also influence our biases. And you would all be familiar with the concept of unconscious bias. And of course, these are the social stereotypes about certain groups of people that we as individuals all form outside of our own conscious awareness. And we all have unconscious beliefs about various social and identity groups. And these biases come from our tendency to kind of organize our social worlds by categorizing. Now, a very quick Google search on unconscious bias will bring up a huge amount of information. And I know for me, here are 10, and these are not in any order. So please don't think the number one bias that we see in the workplace is gender bias. They are just listed in order of 1 to 10, but not because gender is the biggest and name bias is the smallest. But But you will be familiar, I would imagine, with some of these just by looking at the title. And I'm not going to go through all of them because that would take an hour. But of course, gender bias is perhaps an obvious one. Kind of Kelly mentioned it at the start. It's certainly one that I've been exposed to quite a bit in my life. One of the reasons I now work for myself is because the last employer that I was at, when I looked up, and I was a leader managing teams, but when I looked up to the executive leadership team, less than 20% of the people on that team were women. And so I immediately felt like there wasn't a place for me to move up in that organization because there was no space being created for women at the very top. In addition to that, when I reflect on gender bias, which isn't actually called out here as a specific bias, sorry, not gender bias, racial bias, if I reflect on that organisation, there was zero race diversity in that leadership team as well. Other biases, beauty bias, you may or may not have heard from that. There's a bit of research on this one. This is the unconscious bias that makes people believe beautiful people are better or beautiful people are good, whatever your classification of beautiful might be. Ageism, this is definitely one that I see. Again, I had a client brief me recently from a sales perspective that they've tried to hire an older demographic in their workforce and it hasn't yielded very positive results. So they now have probably a conscious age bias actually, where there's a certain age that they don't want to be recruiting above, which is obviously going to create I personally think some challenges moving forwards. The halo or horn effect, again, you may or may not have experienced this one, but this is when you meet someone and they make a really good impression on you. And so you therefore think that when they then do something that might be negative, you assume that they're really good because you've given them a bit of a halo effect. And of course, the horn effect is the opposite of that. If your first experience with them was potentially negative, then you give them an unconscious kind of horn bias, which might be difficult for them to shift. The one that I kind of want to call out here, specifically in relation to this topic of diversity, is confirmation bias. And this is possibly the most powerful of the unconscious biases that we actually deal with as humans, because this impacts our ability to kind of take on new information. It impacts our ability to make decisions. It impacts our ability to kind of grow and develop as individuals, because when we're operating out of a confirmation bias, we only accept information that affirms our beliefs, our current beliefs. So whenever we encounter information that might be challenging those beliefs or is different to our beliefs, we tend to ignore it or actually dismiss it. So if we aren't aware that we have a natural inclination to do that, it can actually become really difficult, perhaps even impossible to objectively and truly listen to opposing viewpoints or information. And confirmation bias, to give you an example, and I'm certainly not wanting to get political or get into this debate, but if we just reflect on Australia a few months ago with the Voice referendum, we definitely saw confirmation bias come into play. And I can honestly say I had confirmation bias. I'm happy to say that I was a yes voter. And I know that there was nothing the No campaign could have said to shift my perspective on that vote. And we certainly saw it happen with people who intuitively wanted to vote no. They kept looking for information and data points, regardless of whether those data points were true or not, to really double down on their no decision. And, that's an element of confirmation bias. The flip to confirmation bias would have been people kind of going, I feel like I know how I want to vote, but I'm really open to hearing the other side of the debate so I can make an informed and factual decision, as opposed to confirmation bias, which is really like, I've just heard a data point that supports my viewpoint and I'm just going to double down and stay there. There's attribution bias, conformity bias. That's kind of where we look for people who are like us and we conform. Affinity bias, the contrast effect, and of course the name bias. Now the name bias I think is a really interesting one when we are recruiting people and building teams and building an organization, because there's quite a lot of data at the moment around the name bias, and some key things simple things we can do to help us remove that from our recruitment process, for instance, and that's de-identifying job applications when they come in, because there is a certain unconscious bias associated with seeing a name or even a geographical location where someone might be based, and that can play into whether we are likely to put that person through a recruitment process or not. So no doubt these show up for some of you. So again, kind of second reflection point on the session today would be, when you look at these unconscious biases, do you think there are any that you know you have? Right? Because we all have them. Absolutely no one can sit there and go, I don't have any biases. We do. But they are unconscious biases. They are not conscious, which means in order for us to do something about them, we kind of need to sit here and delve deep and kind of understand them in more detail to work out, have I ever done that? Have I had that unconscious bias? Because the first thing we need to do is kind of reflect, own, and accept as to whether we do or we don't. And if we do, we then have to think about, well, did that serve me well? Did it serve the team well? Did it serve the organization well? And if it didn't or it's not, what actions can we take to change it? So raise it to the surface and actually potentially do something about it so it stops influencing the inclusive workplace you might be trying to build. So if we know that we've got these biases, and now that we know what diversity is, and it's really the outcome of having inclusion and belonging, how can you manage and implement diversity in your business, and how can I continue to do that as well? And the first thing for me is we've all got to get a bit more curious. And curiosity is actually a skill that we teach in our sales training workshops all the time. Again, ask yourself, do you believe you are a naturally curious person? And because I encounter people all the time who aren't. Some people naturally are. The good thing about curiosity is it's a skill, and you can learn to be curious. And that's simply asking questions of yourself and your biases. Are they showing up in the workplace? Are they influencing your recruiting, your promoting, your work allocation? How and who you give feedback to, how you coach, who and how you support. You've got to get curious and have a look around and ask yourself, is any of this happening in the team that you are leading or the team that you are being responsible for? And if anyone has watched season 1 of Ted Lasso, I wanted to put another video in, but I restrained. There's a wonderful scene in an episode of Ted Lasso where Ted is at the pub and he ends up in a darts kind of showdown with this bully. And it's a lovely, beautiful example of getting curious. And just on Ted Lasso, if you have watched season 1, I've binged it 5 times. I would encourage you, if you are a leader, if you haven't already, to watch it again through the lens of leadership. It is an unbelievably powerful show if you watch it through the lens of leadership. It's just beautiful. As I said, I've watched it 5 times. Reverse mentoring. How do you bring your younger voices to positions of power and bring some new communication styles to the party? You might have some youth in your team, which is wonderful, but they have got great stuff that they can share. We just have to ask them, and we have to get them involved and bring them to the table. So can we do some reverse mentoring? Blind recruitment, I touched on that a moment ago with the name bias. Can you go back and consider your recruitment practices? Could you introduce blind recruitment by removing names, by removing geographic locations, and any other influences that kind of sit outside of the skills and expertise that you might be looking to recruit for, and also bring a different demographic into the recruitment process? We have a tendency in organizations to kind of like have a panel, and it's a panel of senior people that are making these hiring decisions. But again, that has a tendency to recruit more people like you. And if you're wanting to recruit different types of people, if you're wanting to build a more inclusive workplace, then you need to have different people involved in the process. Communicate. So start having these conversations in your workplace. Can you be vulnerable and start asking the questions of your team and other people in your organization about whether they believe you are an inclusive workplace or building an inclusive team? Talk about the value of diversity and how you can continue to build it. Ask for new ideas, proactively ask for input, and don't just do the exercise of asking and getting the input, actually do something with it. Can you include your customers and suppliers? So bring these people into the discussion. The one thing I think is always really interesting is when you ask your customers and suppliers, how they feel about doing business with you. Do they feel like they are part of your organization, or do you treat them in a transactional, commoditized type way? Because that in and of itself can suggest a lot about your workplace and how inclusive it is. Because if we have trusted relationship with our customers and suppliers, they should feel that way. And keep it physical. Let's continue to educate, raise awareness. You know, we're the print and packaging industry, so let's make sure we've got lots of visuals on the walls, posters, signs. Make sure we're creating spaces where people can come together and ask questions and talk about these things and share thoughts and feelings and offer suggestions. Make sure it is included in your policies and your procedures, and that you're really trying to build consistency and a common approach across your organisation when it comes to inclusivity and belonging, which will, of course, if you do that, you will create a diverse workforce. So I wanted to wrap this up with one final quote from Brené Brown. Many of you are probably familiar with Brené Brown. She is a researcher, very well-known researcher in the shame and vulnerability space. She's also an amazing storyteller, and she does a lot of work in the leadership space. If you are looking for amazing leadership content, she has a number of books. They are all excellent. She also has 2 podcasts that she has stopped doing, but they are all still on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, called Unlocking Us and Dare to Lead. They are excellent. And she has actually just started again. She's taken a break from social media, but she has just started a new podcast and a new newsletter. And so there's a lot of content that you can learn and develop just from listening and reading Brené Brown. But she has a wonderful quote that I thought I would leave you with today, which is, if you want people to fully show up, to bring their whole selves, including their unarmored whole hearts, so that we can innovate, solve problems and serve people, we have to be vigilant about creating a culture in which people feel safe, seen, heard and respected. So that's it from me. I think I'm throwing to you now, Kelly, and we're doing a Q&A. Is that right?
Yeah, thank you, Christina. Lots in there. I've written down different notes about being curiously and spontaneously proactively inclusive. I like the shift from diversity, which seems sort of less, inclusivity is more where we lean on, and inclusivity is what we're trying to achieve. There's a couple of questions that come in through, and for those listening, you can put any question that you would like to ask Christina in the chat space. So please type away, as I've got a few already sort of coming through, and from people who I know are listening to the recording from Perth. Hello, shout out to Perth, who get to listen to us in a couple of hours. There's a couple of questions around quotas. So we hear a lot about gender quotas, probably more gender quotas from a sort of more board perspective, but diversity quotas. Any thoughts on quotas? There sort of seems to be 2 very firm, a bit like the confirmation bias. You're talking about very firm schools of thought around quotas that people either support or don't, and reaffirm their position depending on different information they see. Any thoughts on quotas that you've researched or understood of?
So I find quotas a really interesting debate, to be honest, and it can get quite inflammatory when you do talk to people, particularly and with the quota that we've heard about most obviously, which is just gender quotas, trying to get the balance of women. For me, I do think quotas are important because it shines a spotlight on what we need to do. It's highlighting that there is a gap, and we often say this in business, is what you focus on grows. So if we set a quota to have more women in teams, in leadership roles, in executive teams, if you shine a spotlight on it and put a quota on it, then typically you see an improvement, and we have seen an improvement. It hasn't gone far enough. At the end of the day, though, there is still the balance between a quota and making sure we've got the right knowledge, expertise and experience sitting within those teams. So I'm not going to give a clear-cut answer because I do think it is a double-edged sword. The question for me always pairs back to, because I'll hear people say to me, but we don't get women applying for the roles, right? There's just not enough women in the mix. And for me, the question always comes back to, but why is that? You know, why aren't women putting their hands up for these positions that you're struggling to get a gender balance to? And that's where we need to be working, because often we try and solve the puzzle of getting the balance right, the women at the table. We're not actually diving into what's stopping women putting their hand up in the first place. And for me, I would actually rather see more work done there, but I don't think we can remove having quotas for fear that we would just stop focusing on it. But Kelly, I know that you have some thoughts on this, and I'd love to hear your thoughts.
I have to declare this is not me representing VMA nor my board, but Kelly Northwood personally, I think quotas, I probably, 10 years ago didn't support quotas. I was sort of the view, which is often the argument that was put to me, yeah, if you're good enough, you'll get the job. And then I currently 14 years I've worked in association land, and this year it's my first year I've had female board officers. So in 14 years I've sat across 4 different boards that I've actually reported to, and I've sat on other boards across the industry where I was the only female in the room. And we often spoke about we need more diversity on the board, we need more diversity, and however in 14 years we're unable to achieve that. Which in that period of time changed my perspective a little bit on quotas, because I don't believe in an industry that employs just under 230,000 people we couldn't have found female board officers. And that sort of demonstrated by inaction, and your focus is, point about focusing on what we need to do is important, because I think that's the point, quotas. If we don't have some sort of commitment to some of these discussions, and not just gender diversity, don't just put a woman on a board and go, "Whoa, we've ticked our boxes." Diversity and all those boards that I refer to, my president used an expression of male, pale, and stale, but they were all very consistent in age group, socioeconomic, religion, sexuality, and race, so a racial background. So I think it wasn't just gender diversity it was lacking, it was diversity of any level. So quotas, I think, as I say, 14 years, not much change if we had stronger focus and commitment. And I'm absolutely thrilled now that, I report into a board with 2 great human small business owners and leaders who also happen to be female. We're starting to sort of change those positions, but certainly quotas, I think the response to why quotas are not being, people reject quotas is a negative, or you have to be good enough, which is just another reinforcement of a stereotype, because the question then has to be, oh, we're not good enough. So, there's all those sorts of issues I have around the quotas discussion. I think any discussion that you have around this is healthy. Whether you agree, disagree or not, I just think they're all healthy ones anyway. We've got a discussion around, Christina, a question around, could you share any experiences you may have had with organisations you've worked with around effective ways to create a sense of inclusion and belonging, and what impact they may have had on the business? So we've talked about, I love those stats that you put up, 9.5 times more innovative, 8.5 times more team focused. We know absenteeism is reduced. So often when I talk to some of our members around knowing how to do all of this is a lot. And I'm trying to run a print business, and I'm trying to run a sales team, and I'm trying to do all of this. Why should I even consider looking at this? Well, it actually links to successful business, but businesses with diversity have high profitability, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the data is really clear around why we should be doing it. I mean, I haven't found a research paper yet or a study yet, and there's lots of global ones that has debunked the idea that inclusion, belonging, and therefore a diverse workforce isn't a good thing. All the metrics stack up. It's a good thing. It's what we should be striving for. Again, the question comes back to me for around why we can't get it. And, there's a lot in that. In terms of Philip's question, I think it's Philip, around organisations we've worked with that have had effective ways to create a sense of inclusion and belonging and what impact that may have had. There's a couple. I won't share the company names, but I'll give you an example of some of the things these organisations are doing. So they are proactively getting involved in, for instance, things like Women in STEM awards. Again, sorry to use the female example, but an obvious one is how they get involved in sponsoring and supporting women in STEM tech organizations. Another one is you can find businesses now that are recognizing different religious holidays, and they're allowing staff to trade the traditional Christian holidays of, you know, Easter and Christmas for their religious days that we don't have a public holiday for here in Australia. That is what I think is a very simple way to acknowledge, you know, racial and religious differences. In Australia, we force everyone to have the same set of holidays, and I understand there are a lot of reasons for that, but it's a pretty simple thing to say. You can trade Christmas Day that's not meaningful to you for a day in your religious calendar that is, rather than at the moment, perhaps you having to take that as personal leave or annual leave. So that is a very simple thing that says we are inclusive of all religions here. There's obviously some boundaries to that, of course. The other thing that we see happening is we no longer see people saying we only recruit people, you know, our head office is in Victoria, we have an office in Victoria or Melbourne, and therefore all of our staff need to be kind of metro based. We certainly saw during COVID, and many organisations have maintained this, we can now recruit interstate and those people work from home, but you must come to the office 4 times a year for an all office in day at our expense. Right, so the flip side is we might pay you a little bit less for you to live in Brisbane and do your job remotely, but we will bring you to Melbourne at our expense 4 times a year for our hands-on company function. So again, they're the sorts of things that say, well, I can actually apply for a role with that company now without having to live in that city, because we're saying, no, you can be inclusive and we can make this work whilst you live interstate, and we recognise that the task is kind of on us to bring you together. Now, I appreciate that as an example is not necessarily what everyone or every business is able to do, but in terms of that sense of inclusion and belonging, they're the sorts of things we're seeing organisations do all the time. The other thing is teaching leaders the skill to do some of the more competency-based stuff, like how do you have effective feedback and coaching conversations is a small one. And so that we are cultivating teams that are really comfortable talking about these things with each other. Going back again to the voice and the referendum, we saw organisations proactively sitting down with teams and saying, how's everyone feeling? You don't need to share your personal perspective or how you're going to vote, but what are you seeing and what are you worried about? And just having those kind of vulnerable conversations, again, is about inclusivity and belonging, as opposed to here's an organisational perspective, which we did see from some companies, which may not have been what their team members felt. So it's kind of often it's as simple as just creating a space to have a conversation and agreeing to some tangible outcomes. Kelly, do you get around the traps quite a bit? What do you see?
Ultimately, I think in our industry space, at times we're incredibly innovative, and at times we're also incredibly conservative. Making profit in a manufacturing space in Australia is no easy feat, and our members work tirelessly and resilient and courageous. I love working in this industry because of that brutal resilience as well. This is not easy. You have to be operationally excellent. You have to be efficient in everything you do. I think this is a piece that is just another area where we need to be as equally operationally efficient across leadership diversity. However, there is another chapter to it, working from home, changing up public holidays. These for small businesses are incredibly disruptive and at times costly. And so understanding how we as small businesses can actually navigate to the excellence and the benefits of higher profitability, reduced absenteeism, staff retention, all of those things, partnered with how we can also as a small business not have too much disruption, and it is, you know, and bring in those sort of new things. So what sometimes I feel we're sort of trying to break down how we've always done things, and that leads into the conservative nature of our industry, because it's so hard to kind of make a good business and a successful business in manufacturing in Australia. How we can bring in what we need to out of these sorts of leadership diversity discussions, whilst also balancing. And I think that's part of just smashing down the walls a little bit. You know, I know you're coming up as the keynote for Women in Print about stepping outside of our boxes, and that is just as powerful. And sometimes they're the conversations that I think those listening and sort of thinking about how can I navigate. There's an absolute want. I can understand the benefits of. It's just navigating the how without let it run away from you.
Yep.
But also still getting all the benefits from it. And I think that's the challenge from a small business perspective. I also think our industry is under enormous pressure across skilled labour, actually any labour. So I did speak to a member about a month or so ago, and he was explaining to me that every person he had employed over the past 12 months had left within 3 to 4 months. And I talked him through potentially bringing in someone from in the next recruitment phase that he had managed each step to actually start blind recruitment. So he had somebody, his office manager, basically censor everything but skills out of the CVs before they gave them to him. And I believe the person they hired is still there. So we'll see how that process goes, but was a very different individual than the 3 previous years. Now, that is something we can do as small businesses. That's blind recruitment in action. You don't need a recruiter to do that for you. You don't need anything. That is just simply shaking it up a little bit. If you're losing staff, that new staff in 3 months or 2 months turnover that quickly, that's pointing to your recruitment. So they're things from a small business, and those listening, we've got over 80 businesses registered for this discussion today. All of those are small businesses. So of course there'll be other people listening as the link is published. However, when I look at that, they're the really practical ways I think we can as small businesses. Just, read more, self-learn, self-teach. We've spoken about that, but I think there's some options. What about younger audiences? We're looking at developing our emerging talent program. Young people, we talk about ageism. Ageism can be for older cohorts and younger cohorts, right? So it's ageism is any sort of bias towards age at all. This is the challenge. We have an aging workforce. How can we? It is different to discuss with a younger cohort. We're bringing in social media, employment policies. We're bringing in, all these different things. What's any advice for some of the listeners? Probably our last question. Any advice around how we can engage or communicate a little bit better with the younger cohort coming up?
Yes, absolutely. So the first thing I think is really, again, getting curious and understanding by asking how people like to be communicated with. And this works both ways. The younger person getting curious to kind of understand, why would my manager or this business owner, how can I bring value to them? So ask that question, ask it daily, ask it every week. What can I do that would really help you this week? But in reverse, there's some generational differences here, and a younger generation typically needs a lot more feedback than an older generation. So that constant check-in and reassurance that you've done a good job, this is working really well, but also getting curious with them and asking them, what do they see? They've got new eyes and a totally fresh approach coming into your business. When they look around, what do they see? What thoughts have they got about what could be improved or done differently? I'm not sure we do that enough, because sometimes we recruit these younger people, and I have done it myself. And I've given them a set of tasks, and I just want the tasks done. And you might not get the level of feedback or communication that you're wanting. And, it might be a bit of a, I know for me, it was like, what's happened with all of that stuff I thought you were doing? But it's because they were expecting me to be checking in on them. And I don't think I was doing enough cultivating of, what are you seeing? What ideas have you got? And I saw a really good example of this in a small business recently, actually. A friend of mine owns a very small cafe just off Glenfora Road in Hawthorne. And she's got a number of new competitors that have opened up around her, and she's really feeling the business pressure. And she was in tears the other day, and she said to me, apart from the fact that I've just got to run this business and I'm paying a fortune for a barista every day, you know, compared to what we used to pay, and businesses has come off the heat a little bit because of these competitors, I now have to learn this whole social media engine. And that's hours a day, the Instagram, the TikTok, the whatever. And I said to her, but hang on a minute, you've got Tom here every day and he's 19 years old. And I reckon Tom has got downtime every hour, and he probably knows social media and how to create a video, load it, a reel, a post, a like, a blah, blah, whatever you have to do. And have you ever asked him if he would be comfortable doing that as part of his job, which is otherwise taking orders and serving food? You know, it's simply kind of going, there is a talent gap that you've got. Look within your team to say who's got it or who is interested, because someone might not have the skills or capability currently, but they might have an interest to learn it. And that's what we need to unearth and uncover by just asking questions, being curious, and kind of leaning into the process. I think one of the things you mentioned before, Kelly, the Women in Print stuff that we're doing, which is about thinking outside of the box. The first thing that we have to do as individuals is work out what is going on inside our own box currently, because we all have a comfort zone that we work within, a way of working that we get very comfortable with, and it keeps us safe. It's kind of got us to where we are today, and a lot of people are running very successful businesses. But under pressure, it brings out behaviours in us that don't necessarily serve us well. When we're under stress or pressure, it triggers a set of behaviours in us, signals that kind of suggest something needs to change, which means we've got to get out of our comfort zone and we've got to do something a little bit differently. And so if you, by chance, you're running in a business and, you know, you are under pressure to change performance, and a part of that, it could be coming from lots of different spaces, you kind of have to ask yourself, what am I really anchored to? Where is my mindset really set? And what is it that I could potentially change? And a part of that might be just looking around and going, how do we utilize the resources that we've got in a totally different way? And a part of that's just by getting curious and asking, you know, different questions, asking for thoughts and feedback and opinions.
I think one of the things you mentioned there about you know, looking at that younger sort of person, something I've been playing around with is a new term, because we need more ageism, sexism, you know, we need more isms in our life. But I actually think with the recent skill shortages as well as wage increases, I am finding a new sort of piece that I'm seeing, a new sort of theory, which is salaryism. And what I'm hearing a lot is from people who are hiring, say, graduates. They can't do anything. I used to be able to pay 60 grand. Now I'm paying 80, and they want 100 grand. And now they want, and this expectation, which is this salaryism, is from, because I used to pay 60 or 40,000, you know, 5-6 years ago for a graduate, and now I'm paying 80, 100, 110, because that's the expectation to. This salaryism is, I'm paying you this much, you therefore must be what I used to pay that person $100,000 a year for. And the reality is, with skills shortages, that person is still got the same skill sets as the graduate. And we need to, once you've made that agreement that that's what you're going to pay them, that's you've agreed to that, and now you need to move on to continue supporting them, growing them, and investing in them as graduates. And I know it hurts in small business when you see salaries go up that large, and let me assure you, you know, people aren't paying that much more for it. So I understand the challenge of it. However, this salaryism piece, it's a real commentary. It's often a problem, a barrier, or it's a barrier for growth for that person, that for all the other ticks is actually right for your business. So that's just one that I've noticed. We have run out of time. You can all coin my salaryism phrase. It's all fun. There's no copyrights in our space. But thank you, Christina. I always love chatting with you. Intelligent, powerful, successful human, and you're a woman to boot. So what else could possibly go wrong?
Takes one to know one, Kelly.
I appreciate it, and it is a little bit outside your box. You're a sales specialist, and you're already working across our industry since P.o.P last year. But I appreciate you coming into the challenge, because I think you've given more innovation and thoughts to a pretty difficult and challenging topic. And I thank you on behalf of our members and industry. Next week, we have week 4. We're going to be focusing on all things sustainable. Emmanuel Dumitru from SGS will be coming to discuss and explaining the definitions of sustainability. This will be linked very heavily with our certification across Sustainable Greenprint. SGS is now our independent auditor reviewing this the certification. It is the only environmental standard for our industry. There are also some partnerships that I'll be talking to next week across Europe and the US. So we are looking to go global. Understanding laws, regulations, they are changing, and there is also so much work that all of us can do, but this does not need to be something that we have to do on our own. The Industry Association is right behind you, and Emmanuel will talk through all of the details behind that. Last but not least, I do again want to thank Rico and Media Super. Our sponsor partners, couldn't do it without them, and I look forward to continuing their sponsorship throughout the rest of the, what are we, almost halfway next week, season of the P.o.P webinar series. To London, Phil, George, Emma and the team behind all of this. You see me rock up and talk about all these things. They brief me. They do the research. They're amazing, and they're also running tech very quickly in the background. So thank you to all of the team behind today getting it up, and all of the class notes, all of the recorded links will be sent to everyone who has registered, including attendees, tomorrow. So you'll be able to listen again, replay, and also some of this might even be worth starting some of those conversations by sharing this presentation with your teams. Start the conversation, be curious, and be spontaneously and proactively inclusive. Have a great day, everyone, and thanks for tapping in today. Cheers.